when they're retired out of circulation, the sort of graveyard for banknotes, if you like. And the banknotes were there reflecting on their contribution to society during their time in circulation. And the $100 note said that he was involved in many important transactions, including property deals and a few drug transactions, but basically he said he made a very significant contribution. And the $20 note said that he went to the supermarket a lot and helped to feed families. And then they looked at the $5 note and he said, well, I went to church a lot. So church is not really the place for high finance. However, in my university days when I studied economics, it always concerned me that values and ethics were that values and ethics in business, in economics and in commerce were ignored. In business and finance, all ask the question, is it profitable? Most ask, is it legal? But whether it's good or bad or right or wrong was really never asked. You know, you're taught what happens if you change the rate of interest. Well, certain things happen to investment, certain things happen to consumption and to savings and so on, and it was end of story. There was no reflection on the values and the outcomes and the consequences. So economics was and still is mainly a values-free zone. And it's for this reason that I spent 15 years working with the St James Ethics Centre to help implement the ethical dimension to corporate governance and university business education. So I want, in this short time that we have, to focus on the global financial crisis and explore the deeper issues that are involved. Before the 1980s, investment banks were small operations made up of wealthy partners who were very careful where they placed their money. These institutions exploded in the 1980s with financial deregulation and eventually began paying people huge bonuses for risking not their own, but other people's money. Others in building and loan societies like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae paid people for how much business they brought in with no real risk assessment and no responsibility. These subprime mortgages needed a deposit of only 1% and were then sold to investment banks as they were put into collateralized debt obligations, or as they call them, CDOs, and were given AAA ratings, which made them look as safe as government securities. What this meant was loans were given to people who could not repay them, and as anyone could get a mortgage, housing prices boomed. Into this ticking time bomb, you also had insurance schemes where people insured against default on these loans, giving rise to credit default swaps, CDSs. And added to this toxic mix was the speculation in derivatives. The ratio between loans and capital in this out-of-control industry was 33-1. Institutions like Goldman Sachs and others were selling securities they believed to be worthless because at the same time they were actually betting against them. Rating agencies made a fortune giving these financial products and institutions high ratings. At the same time, these people were paying themselves billions in bonuses. CEOs' pay in this industry rose to 325 times that of their average employees. whereas in the 1970s, CEOs were paid roughly 30 times that of their average employees. As a result of all this, in the United States, the debt was taken over by the government with the exception of Lehman Brothers. The US economy has declined with 20 million people out of work, and for the first time in history, the current generation of Americans are less prosperous and will have less education than their parents. And the reforms they introduced in 2010 are weak, and the people who created these problems are still involved. The effects of all of this are, firstly, a loss of household wealth, leading to a decline in consumption and therefore a decline in GDP or national wealth. Secondly, the rise in risk has increased the cost of capital, decreasing private investment and further shrinking the economy and therefore national wealth. And thirdly, in such an environment, householders have increased their level of savings due to the risky future, and this further contracts the economy and wealth creation. In Europe, the problems are caused by government spending beyond their means, and the Eurozone making it impossible for those in trouble to float their currency. So what I now want to address is, what lies behind all of this devastation? Was it simply the result of deregulation, or is there something more involved? Regulation is only part of the answer. In the words of Martin Luther King, regulations may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. Regulations involve costs, and they always fall on the consumer. And they often have consequences that were not foreseen. So what is required is sensible regulation. But there's a deeper issue here that is usually not addressed. And it's what I would call the money culture. In 1990, Warren Buffett said to a subcommittee of American Congress, "Huge markets attract people who measure themselves by money. It's not the only type of people they attract, but there is a special attraction of markets. If somebody goes through life and measures themselves solely by how much they have or how much they earned last year, then sooner or later they are going to get into trouble." That's Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. Markets are not corrupt, but they can be corrupting. They work reasonably well in allocating the scarce resource of capital, and certainly better than any known alternative. But problems arise when they lack an ethical dimension.